I am Dr. Ellie House, and I have worked with students for over 15 years. And at some point during their academic journey, they fall into a routine. I'm curious if you can relate. Please raise your hand if you have ever accomplished something and then immediately moved on to the next task. No reflection, no acknowledgement, just what's next? We live in a culture that celebrates achievement, but rushes right past gratitude. We chase the next grade, the next milestone, the next opportunity, without stopping to recognize what it took to get here. And when we don't pause, we miss something powerful. When we don't pause, we create something I call the recognition gap. The recognition gap is the distance between the effort we give and the credit we allow ourselves to receive. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, I worked with students who were suddenly labeled essential workers. Part-time jobs became 40-hour work weeks, but their classes, deadlines, and expectations stayed the same, even though the world had shifted beneath their feet. Students would say, I don't get it. I'm working the same way. Why does everything feel harder? It wasn't that they were less capable. It was that their path had changed. What they were experiencing was the recognition gap. Their effort had increased, but the credit they gave themselves had not. That is when the phrase, give yourself credit for the win, was born. I told them, you didn't ask for this, you didn't design this, but you adapted, you showed up, you kept going. Give yourself credit for the win. What you did deserves to be recognized. And something shifted. Their workload didn't change, but their self-talk sure did. Instead of, why can't I do this like I used to? It became, at least I showed up. At least I gave it everything I had. And that shift wasn't lowering standards. It was practicing gratitude, not just for results, but for resilience. And last year, I had to learn that lesson myself. My father was diagnosed with cancer while I was preparing to defend my doctoral dissertation proposal. In August, on his birthday, we learned the cancer had spread. 3 weeks later, he chose hospice care. On August 29th, I delivered my proposal. I passed. The following day, my father passed away. For months, I didn't think of that moment as a win. I thought, of course I showed up. What else was I going to do? Until someone said to me, if you can accomplish all of that during such a difficult time, I can finally start that project I've been afraid of. And that's when it clicked. Giving yourself credit for the win isn't bragging, it isn't comparison, it isn't saying someone else couldn't do it. It is gratitude. Gratitude for the late nights, the hard conversations, the courage it took to try. Gratitude for the people who stood beside you, and gratitude for the version of you who didn't quit. And over time, I noticed something interesting. When students learned to close the recognition gap, they did 3 simple things. They noticed the effort it took to keep going. They named the win, even if it was simply showing up. And they shared the growth. Notice, name, share. That is how we close the recognition gap. Because when people recognize their effort, they stop measuring themselves only by perfection. They start recognizing progress. They move from pressure to perspective. And something else happens when we acknowledge our wins out loud. We give someone else permission to believe something new. They think, if you can survive that, maybe I can start. If you can adapt, maybe I can too. That is how gratitude strengthens communities, because gratitude is not passive. It is not polite. It is not small. Gratitude is recognition of effort, recognition of growth, recognition of becoming. And here's the part we don't talk about enough. When you refuse to acknowledge your own growth, you don't just rob yourself, you rob the people watching you. One student will say, "At least I showed up." And suddenly another realizes, wait, you're right. That counts. That is how it spreads. Student voices don't just reflect the future, they shape it. Not because they're perfect, but because they're honest. And honesty builds courage, and courage builds community. So before you leave here today, I want you to think of one win you've minimized, one moment you survived, one responsibility you carried, one effort you dismissed as just doing what I had to do. That was not just, that was growth. Tonight, write that win down. Honor it, name it, share it. Because the moment you give yourself credit for the win, you are not inflating your ego. You are practicing gratitude for your growth. And when you practice gratitude for your growth, you give someone else permission to believe in theirs. So here is the truth I hope you carry with you. You do not need to wait for perfection to be proud. You do not need applause to acknowledge effort. And you do not need tragedy to recognize strength. Give yourself credit for the win, because gratitude begins the moment you decide your growth counts. Thank you.